Hello, my name is Jonathan and I'm just going to show you a really simple way to make maquettes of your already finished pieces. In this case, I want to paint this character a few more times, and it will be really convenient because I'm going to change the focal length a lot to have a very precise model, an idea of what she looks like. So in this case, I'm going to show you how I'm using a tool that's by a man named Keen Tools, producing them Keen Tools. It's just facebuilder for Blender, which is meant to take and create 3D models from photos. But in this case, I'm just going to use it for my own paintings. And all you have to do is to use this facebuilder is to have one photo or more, and you can make a 3D model off of your picture. So you just need to export your piece or painting in full size, and it will render the result that is similar like this, which is what I'll be showing you how to create in this video, and even show you how to put a bit of simple hair on it, so you really can get a sense of, if you were looking at it from a certain angle, what kind of look would that be, and really having a precise model and idea. This process has helped me a lot to just paint a character and then make a maquette of their face, and then have that maquette to improve the rest of the paintings and drawings that I make of this character, so they all have a much higher consistency, internal consistency. So let's get started. I did make this 3D model already, which meant that I had access to actually draw this profile view, so I will also be using that, but I won't actually just cheat and say, oh, I already finished the 3D model. So let's make a new document. All right, so now we have a new document, which is empty. As you can see, there's just a default cube in it, which I'm just gonna remove, pressing X, and if I press Shift A, I get this option now after I install the add-on, just add mesh facebuilder head, and it looks like this, and it's just a very generic person, and we haven't really done anything to it yet. So what you're going to go into is choose facebuilder and then say add images. In this case, you can just copy paste the place where you have your files. So I'm going to add the close-up, and then I'm going to add these images twice. So I have this one right now. I'm just going to add one more copy of that. So now I can use both the front and the side view. So essentially how it works is that you pin, so let me just show you, you pin the face by left clicking, and when you pin it over, you can then place the head in such a way that once you have 3 pins added, it will be quite precise and close to where the face is in space. It slowly moves around the 3D model. So if I make a second view, so you can see it, if I move the nose up or down, it will transform the model underneath. Speed through this process because it's just putting pointers and markers on a face. I think it's good practice just to have the 3D model in the other view, so you can keep an eye on how it's transforming. Else you can end up with quite some crazy noses and stuff without really noticing. Once you have something that you feel quite content with, you're like, oh yeah, this is good, then you can now use the second part of the facebuilder add-on, which is to create a texture from this mesh. And I'm just going to select max face, and then I will show you now the one more thing is you have to click expand edges, because then if there's any black points, that where the projection can't see, like behind the nose, for instance here, then it won't like mess up and I just have a bunch of black dots. So expand edges makes that possible. And Once you click create text, you can choose all these images. I can just show you, if you just have a drawing of your character in profile and front view, I can just show you what that looks like. So I choose just these two, press OK. And you can see how already this level of model would be quite useful in a piece where like you want to have some kind of specific lighting setup, where you might have, you know, a colored light source or like a primary light source, and then you also have a fill light that might be significantly white color. Let me just do that to maybe something like 15. Oop. And then a different color. Then you would see that there are points where obviously this color wouldn't touch, and that you can create these very interesting shapes just from knowing that. But of course, let's just make the texture from the actual projection. So I'm going to use the painting now as the texture that I'm creating from. And this is what that ends up looking like. So now that I have the model, I can close. And we already have, and now we have the local colors also being affected by the light. But of course, you would be right in saying that this is still quite a messy texture. So we are going to clean that up. First off, if you just had like a very clean painting and you already felt, okay, this is good enough, one thing that will add a bit more realism to the piece is if you go in here into the shader editor. Like you can also find up here in the tab by shading, and you drag the color map into the subsurface color. And now if I turn that on, you see it now. It actually looks like the skin is reflecting something, so you would get that edge because it's using the same color of the skin. I'm just going to clean up this texture in texture paint. So here you see it, and you can just select a color pick, like the base color, because we're getting the majority of All right, so I ran into a bit of an error at this stage where my color picker was just not picking up the right color. So you see if I press here, it doesn't actually sample the color. But what I found was that if you transform the display device and make sure, hang on, let me show you. If you run into something where the color picker doesn't work like I just did, first time I had this problem, is that you simply had to remake the texture or change the color space to sRGB, and then that still didn't work, as you can see, obviously. So if you end up in a situation where your color picker doesn't necessarily work, where you're like, hey, what's going on? Like you select, obviously you can see that I'm selecting this pink color, and it's just not really choosing the color that you expect. It's not coming out. What you have to do is you have to, when you sample a color, you simply click and remove add to palette, and then it will just work. I don't know why that is, but that's fine for me right now. You just want to be able to sample these colors, because again, we're not really gonna be doing too tight of a UV texture paint at all, because like we're gonna get most of our information again from this maquette through the shadows, and then you might want maybe a bit of dark holes for the nostrils and stuff like that to just have a simple amount of occlusion. But again, that's really not necessary. Once you have the model set up, you just go around and you paint it out. And you can paint both on the UV image, or you can paint on the 3D model itself. And for stuff like circles, you want to paint in these shapes, you want to probably paint them more on the 3D model, because if you draw a perfect circle, you see it gets warped. And here, of course, you can spend as much time as you like trying to make your maquette more or less accurate. So now we have our simple base mesh that we can now already use for quite a lot of things. If you feel like you need something more particular, then if you just want to push something like very small around, then this model is by default mirrored, so you can actually use just any of these tools to smoothen things out or make something more particular to the thing that you have in mind, which is, like obviously the use case that you would want out of a base mesh, that you look at it as not necessarily just like a final result, but actually a starter. So now, like by adding a small amount of particularity to the nose and the area around the eyes, you can really make the character feel precise. So last thing I promised was to show you how to do the hair, to the hairline. And if your character is just having short hair, just enable character is just having a short hairdo, like you just want to know the perspective of the hairline so that you can just draw the hair. And the simplest method is just to select everything. Once you have everything selected out, then you're just gonna duplicate that by clicking Shift D, and then you want to separate it. And you can just press F3 and search for separation. So now you have this secondary object that, if I go out, is basically the sculpt of this person. And what you can do is just, that is like a simple extrude, and now you have something that you can clearly see as the hairline. Let me just make that something. You really see, like already then you would have a sense of like where the hair should start coming out. But I promised to show you how to make that much more believable. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn another tool. I know it's already been a lot. That is the curve tool. So what you're going to do is you're going to press Shift A to make a curve. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a Bezier curve. So it's this little noodle here, and just going to put that at x0. And then I want to duplicate it, just have another one. So we have two of them, and then the then the third thing we need is to add a bezier circle. And we're going to use these three parts together to essentially create the hair strand. Let me show you how that works. So if I select the bezier curve, and for some organization, you can just name it. So this is the one I'm going to use for hair. So I'm just going to bez for hair 0, 0, because then by giving a number, it's going to increment that number instead. And this one is for the taper of the hairline, you'll see soon. And this one is the bezier bevel. And what I'm going to do now is in the settings, there's this geometry tab where if you see here, geometry, and if I make this circle the bevel object, then you see immediately that it actually follows the curve, the line itself, and creates this tube. And if I then select everything and maybe just subdivide this, you can see that you can actually transform the lines themselves and make that very hair-like. Of course, you know, hair doesn't really look like this. It has a tapered end, especially stainless style. I mean, it's any hair really. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this object again, and we're going to put this taper to the best taper lines. And now you see we get this dollop of whipped cream. So let me just lock the view to this, and that can be useful. But right now, if I'm transforming it, you see this will be very difficult to actually place on the head. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the point of origin where it is transformed from all the way to the bottom here by the end of the hair. So I'm going to select this point by going to tab and selecting it, and then I'm going to press Shift S and say cursor to select it. So now it's going to put the cursor selector. Then you have to exit tab, and then you have to say geometry to origin to 3D cursor. And now you see the camera just moved because it's locked to the origin of this object. So now if I'm moving this object around, it has a much more consistent placement of touch. And since this is the base object that we're going to be duplicating over and over again to create the hairline, we are going to just make it a bit more straight and narrow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything by going to edit mode and pressing A for selecting everything. And I'm just going to scale that to y to 0. So SY 0. And now it's a perfectly straight line. So now when I'm transforming this, you see that when I'm transforming along the X line, then it will make it longer. Or if I transform along the Y line, it will be wider. I like it to be X for size, so I'm just going to rotate it in the C axis. So I'm pressing rotate C minus 90. There you go. So now when I'm scaling it on the X axis, it makes a wider dollop of cream. And you can, of course, now because it has this, you can actually edit the table. So I'm just going to make it a bit more clean here. And this is a pretty good base object to actually work from. So I'm just going to take and by pressing V, you can actually transform the hair object, the curves very simply. So you make it free. So now you can actually make it do anything you want. If you want to add a second curve straight in the middle, you just select 2 points, and then you can subdivide in the right-click menu. So I have this object now of my bez for hair, 0, 0. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it a placeholder material. Because if you don't give it a material now, then it will you will have to do it quite much later. So now I can just attach a color to that. And if you want to make it really easy to put it on the head itself, then you can go up here in this menu and say snap to faces, and that will mean that it will now, like when it gets close to a face, it will actually snap to it. But I feel like it's actually harder to control it using snapping. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to unlock my view, and you see now I have the hair strands. So I'm just going to look at my actual image, my reference image. I'm just going to turn that to always on top. And what I'm going to work towards is have it sort the big shapes out first, and then we can move into the smaller shapes. So I'm just going to rotate this in the x-axis so that you shouldn't see. Wait, hang on. Before we do that, we have to actually apply the transformation. Rotation. So now it's in the C -90, so that it will be consistent throughout. So the first thing I'm going to solve is I'm just going to take and get it close to the beginning of the hairline, and what I want is I want to get the biggest shape of hair done first. So if I just scale it a bit up on the x-axis, and now this becomes quite similar to any kind of path tool that you ever used, really. And of course you can also remember that you can move it along a certain axis by pressing that axis, or if you want to move it on every axis but a certain axis, if you press shift and either X, Y, or Z, it will move on any axis but those. as you can see, just having these big shapes and then breaking them up a bit already starts selling the idea of the hair quite well. And now I'm just going to add a few more smaller strands, and you can of course go in and make this as precise as you would like. I mean, really the goal is just to have something that where it becomes quite simple for you to make your own reference and then have that be useful to you right away, right? I think that having a similar maquette like this really helps when you are trying to repaint the same character in multiple times, because you can really gain a lot from just having it allows you to make much more complicated lighting setups even with stylized characters, because you can really tell like where would something like if you have these very extravagant hair locks flying around everywhere, how would that actually interact with the scene itself. And especially like in this case where I have this fill light in, there's also still an area where this light is not hitting at all. And if you have this just be the neutral color of the skin in the painting, that will really help sell the idea of this bounce light much more strongly. I've had a really great time using these kind of maquettes for reducing guesswork. That would be the preliminary final result that you would then have, and of course you can go in and make it more or less pretty as you want, either by using the sculpting tools to figure out a bit more specifics, because it's just a base mesh. The last thing you want to do, of course, is to select everything but the head. Let me just see if I can do that. And then selecting the head, we're just gonna pair in those objects and say keep transform, because now if I rotate the object, then they will actually rotate with it. Of course, now I've got the light source mixed into that. So let me just undo that. Because if you don't, then the second that you start making a scene with this and you were like, oh, maybe it would be better with this angle, then you see it pops off right away. Even though that is kind of funny to have the hairdo just suspended in space like that. But that's it for this little explanation of like turning your final images that you made into useful maquettes that then enables you to redraw this image, these characters that you're building over and over, and have them have an internal consistency, but also a feeling that you really know what they're supposed to look like. And I think that's a pretty exciting possibility with 3D. All right, I hope that you go and make some cool projects with that. Thank you. The final detail, of course, would be to add a shine in the eyes, right? I completely skipped that part. And it's very simple to do. You just go into edit mode, and then either with a box select or a select circle, you just select the eyeball and also what's around it. You don't have to be super precise with this. And then what you want to do is you want to select both eyes. Get a rough approximation like that. And now we're just gonna duplicate this material and hit assign. And you see now that you have the eyes be as normal, but if I go into this material, I'm just gonna change this name to eyes. Change the name of the model itself. Then if I go in here and I just turn down the roughness, and increase the specular. You start having this going on. So you can have it, you can edit those settings as well. So now that when the light gets transformed in the view space, it actually has an effect on the irises in a realistic way. Well, not realistic, I mean, but it's a good close approximation. And that's quite helpful when you are dealing with where should the reflection be coming from, and then you can add those white highlights much simpler. Yeah, so that's it. Okay, so that was the little addendum.